The cold that morning cut through layers of clothes like they weren't there. The bridge near the freight yard leaked water from cracks above, dripping in slow intervals onto the cement. Liam stood there because the wind was weaker underneath and because no one bothered him in that corner. At 12, he already knew which parts of the city spit him out and which ones ignored him long enough to rest his legs. His backpack carried everything he owned: a shirt, a half-torn comic, and a plastic bag with stale crackers he was rationing without knowing how long they needed to last. He was rubbing his hands together when he heard the faint, uneven whine. It wasn't loud. It sounded like a breath caught inside something fragile. Liam followed the noise and climbed over a concrete slab fallen from the support beam. Behind it, curled against the wall, was a puppy the size of a boot. Wet fur stuck to its ribs. The animal shivered so hard its paws tapped against the ground. One of its ears looked torn at the tip. The belly was pulled tight to its spine. Liam crouched. The puppy tried to lift its head but failed. It didn't growl or run. It didn't have the strength. Liam hesitated to touch it. Kids like him were told not to pick up strays because of fleas or disease. But the puppy kept making that thin sound, a broken rhythm that felt too familiar. He recognized it as the same sound he used to make when he woke alone in the shelter basement at night. He slid his hands under the dog, and the cold bit into his palms. The puppy's body felt like holding wet stones. When he lifted it, the animal's breath hitched and steadied against his chest. Liam pressed it inside his coat, closing the zipper around both of them. The warmth was weak but shared. The bridge above groaned when a truck passed over. The sound vibrated down through metal beams. It covered another noise at first. A distant motorcycle engine revving low somewhere in the industrial district. Locals said a biker crew rode through here sometimes. They weren't the type that picked fights at bars or sped through neighborhoods. They were older, heavier, and moved in groups of 3 or 4. The freight yard guards called them the Steel Guardians, usually in a tone suggesting they never caused trouble but weren't worth provoking either. Liam never saw them himself. Bikes that loud didn't get near kids like him. He shifted the puppy inside the coat and stepped out from under the bridge. The wind slapped his face and pulled a cough from his chest. He needed to find somewhere out of the cold. The community center didn't open until noon, and even then they didn't let kids bring animals inside. The workers always said they had rules, liability, paperwork. They never asked where Liam slept or why he avoided going home. He tried walking faster, but the puppy's breathing hitched again. Liam slowed, afraid he would jostle the fragile body too much. He reached the edge of the vacant lot, where trash bins overflowed and the smell of diesel hung low. The morning sun hadn't risen enough to warm the ground. The city felt like a maze with no place for him to stand still. A man stepped out from behind a dumpster, holding an empty cup. He wore a reflective vest from a job site, but his eyes were already unfocused. He asked Liam if he had spare change. When Liam shook his head, the man muttered something and slapped the cup against the wall, startling the puppy. Liam backed away quickly, keeping his coat tight. Encounters like that always reminded him how invisible he was until someone wanted something from him. He crossed the lot and headed toward the old underpass, where a broken vending machine sometimes gave out melted candy if kicked right. It wasn't a plan, but it was movement, and movement felt safer than being stationary with a vulnerable animal pressed to his chest. On his way, he passed 2 teenagers smoking behind the fence. They stared at him, then at the bulge in his coat. One of them asked what he was hiding. Liam kept walking without answering. The teenager took a step forward, but the other pulled him back, saying it wasn't worth it. Still, Liam felt the pressure in his ribs, the tension of expecting someone to follow him. No one did, but the fear stayed. He reached the vending machine and tested it with a kick. Nothing dropped. His breathing grew sharper from frustration. He knew the puppy needed food, any food, and warmth and maybe medicine. Liam swallowed the knot in his throat and sat with his back against the concrete wall, pulling the dog partly out of the coat just to check its eyes. They were glassy, unfocused but alive. He whispered to it without words, just soft breaths. The puppy tried to lick his thumb but didn't reach. Liam placed it back inside his coat and looked around to confirm no one else was near. He didn't need anyone telling him he couldn't keep it. He didn't have much, but he had arms and a coat, and right now that was more than the puppy had. A sound drifted from the street again, The same low motorcycle rumble as before, then fading. Liam didn't see anything, but the noise stayed in his mind. Whoever rode those bikes lived in a different world, one where people watched out for each other. Liam wondered for a moment what it felt like to be wanted enough that someone would search for you if you were lost. The puppy trembled harder. Liam tightened his grip, steadying it with both hands. The city kept moving around him, unaware of a boy and a freezing animal trying to survive under a bridge's shadow. He pushed himself up. He needed to find help, even if it meant stealing a blanket from the donation bin behind the church, or warming the puppy with hand dryers in a public restroom. Standing still wouldn't keep them alive long enough. He took a breath that tasted like cold metal and walked toward the street. Liam headed toward the back of the church because the donation bin there sometimes overflowed. People dropped blankets and coats when the weather shifted, and the volunteers didn't always collect everything right away. He moved slowly so he didn't shake the puppy too much. The dog's breath warmed the fabric of his shirt, creating a small patch of heat against the cold morning air. The church lot was empty. The side door stayed locked except on weekends. Liam went straight to the metal bin. It was nearly empty this time, just a torn scarf and a pair of shoes missing laces. He lifted the scarf, shook it out, and wrapped it inside his coat around the puppy. The dog pushed its face into the soft wool, as if trying to disappear into it. Liam kept one hand on its back, counting each rise and fall of its breathing. He sat on the curb. He needed to think. 12 years old felt older when the decisions he made mattered so much. The shelters he'd drifted through had rules about animals. The group home that briefly took him in had rules too. Everywhere had rules that didn't fit kids who moved quietly through the city, trying not to be noticed. He'd found the puppy 2 days after leaving the last temporary placement. Technically, the state thought he was still there. He'd walked out after the night the older boys cornered him in the hallway, blocking the bathroom door until he cried. No one stepped in. The staff pretended not to hear. He knew what happened to kids who complained. They were shuffled somewhere else, told to stop causing trouble or placed in rooms with worse problems. So he left with his backpack and the stale crackers, hoping the city would be easier than the walls that held him. It wasn't, but at least the city didn't pretend to care. He looked down at the puppy, its breathing steadied but stayed shallow. He remembered how he found it, curled near a drainage pipe on his first night under the bridge. It had tried to bark when he approached, but no sound came out. Liam had shared the crackers, breaking them into crumbs and pushing them close enough that the dog could lick them. That moment felt like a pact, even if he didn't say anything out loud. Two beings overlooked by everyone else, choosing not to overlook each other. Since then, the puppy followed him whenever he moved. Even when its legs trembled too much to stand, it watched him with soft eyes. Liam interpreted it as trust, though he wasn't sure. Maybe it was just survival instinct, but he liked the idea that something in the world chose him back. The city morning grew louder. Trucks rolled through, workers shouted across lots, and a bus released its brakes with a sigh. Liam tucked the scarf tighter around the dog and decided to head toward the public library. They didn't let backpacks inside if they looked suspicious, but sometimes if he kept his head down, he could slip into the bathroom and let the hand dryers warm the puppy. It wasn't ideal, but neither was watching the dog freeze. He walked with careful steps, shifting weight to keep the dog cradled against him. As he crossed the street, a car honked. He flinched. The driver yelled something and sped off. The puppy twitched from the noise, and Liam rubbed its side through the coat. He reached the library 15 minutes before opening. A line of adults waited, holding laptops or bags. Some glanced at him, then looked away. He sat near the bike rack, pretending he belonged there. When the doors finally opened, he slipped inside with the line, heading straight for the restroom. Inside, he locked himself in the far stall. The hand dryer was on the wall outside, too exposed. He knew the risk, but had no choice. He unzipped his coat just enough to let the puppy breathe easier. The dog's nose was cold. Liam pressed the pup against his stomach and hugged it close. For a few minutes he sat there, knees to his chest, listening to footsteps outside the stall. People came and went. He kept still, barely breathing. The puppy made a short cry once, and Liam covered its snout gently. He whispered apologies without using words, only breath. After a while, the restroom emptied. Liam opened the stall carefully, checked that no one else was inside, and carried the puppy to the dryer. He pressed the button and angled the warm air downward, shielding the dog with his body so the sound didn't echo too loudly. The heat slowly loosened the tension in the puppy's limbs. Liam watched its chest rise more naturally. The bathroom door swung open. Liam froze. A custodian entered, dragging a mop bucket. The man saw him and frowned. Liam stepped away from the dryer, hiding the dog inside his coat. The custodian didn't ask questions. He just pointed to the door. Liam nodded and left. Outside, the puppy started trembling again. Liam felt panic rise. He didn't know how to keep it warm long enough. He considered going back under the bridge, but the memory of the cold there pushed the idea away. He walked aimlessly until he reached the alley behind a bakery. The smell of fresh bread surrounded him. The employees sometimes tossed out rolls from the day before. Liam waited near the dumpster, not too close, just enough to catch what they threw away. 10 minutes later, a worker came out with a tray. He dumped everything into the bin without looking around. Once he went back inside, Liam hurried to grab a soft roll. He tore small pieces and fed them to the puppy, making sure the dog didn't choke. The pup ate slowly, but it ate. That small victory made Liam's shoulders loosen. He kept walking until he reached a patch of sun between two buildings. He sat against the wall and let the warmth hit them both. The puppy rested with its head under his chin. Liam didn't move. He felt the weight of the dog, the soft breathing, the fragile life depending entirely on him. A motorcycle passed on the street nearby. The engine was deeper than most, not aggressive, controlled. Liam didn't look up, but something in the tone felt different. The sound echoed off the brick walls and faded. The puppy stirred at the noise but didn't react badly. Liam closed his eyes. He wondered what would happen if someone found out he had the dog. He wondered what would happen if he didn't find a way to make it through the night. He wondered if there was a place where people didn't walk past kids like him, or animals like this puppy. He didn't know that somewhere else in the city, a little girl was crying in the back of a bike shop, holding a collar with a small metal tag that belonged to the very puppy lying against his chest. Liam stayed in the strip of sun as long as he could, but the day kept moving and the warmth shifted away. The puppy pressed tighter against him when the shadow returned. Its breathing had steadied for a while, but now the tremors came back in small waves. Liam ran his hand over its back, slow and steady. The dog's ribs felt too sharp. Its fur stayed damp no matter how much he tried to dry it with the scarf. He needed a place with heat, real heat, not a hand dryer or a patch of sun, somewhere the puppy could rest without shaking. The problem was that every warm place he knew came with rules, adults, questions, or locked doors. He headed toward the storage lot where old shipping containers sat rusting. Some had broken locks or loose doors where wind crept in. He'd hidden there before when rainstorms got too heavy. It wasn't perfect, but it was shelter. As he crossed the alley, a group of older boys from the neighborhood stood near the fence. They recognized him from the shelters. One of them lifted his chin in greeting, but not the friendly kind. They saw the bulge of his coat and started whispering to each other. Liam kept his pace even, not speeding up or slowing down. He knew the rule. Sudden movement attracted attention. One of the boys stepped forward and asked what he was hiding. Liam didn't answer. He shifted his body, angling the puppy away from view. The boy laughed and called him names. Another one threw a crumpled can at his feet. When Liam didn't react, they got bored quicker than usual. The tallest one waved them off, and the group wandered away. But Liam's hands stayed tight around the puppy long after they were gone. He reached the storage lot and squeezed through the gap in the fence. The metal scraped his shoulder, but he ignored the sting. The containers sat in crooked rows. He checked a few doors until he found one that wasn't fully latched. He pushed it open, just enough to slip inside. The interior smelled like rust and old cardboard. Dust floated in thin lines where sunlight slipped through cracks. Liam sat on the floor and unwrapped the scarf from around the puppy. He placed the dog on his lap. The floor was cold, but at least there was no wind. The puppy curled into itself, paws tucked under its chest. Liam watched its small body rise and fall, the movement uneven. He placed both hands around the animal, creating a cocoon of warmth. The dog's eyes flickered open. It looked at him without judgment, without fear. Only exhaustion. He whispered soft breaths again. Not words. Just presence. Sometimes the silence in places like this felt too heavy. It pulled memories out that Liam tried to push down. The nights he spent in the basement of the shelter, listening to the older kids argue, the time he woke to find his shoes stolen, the mornings when staff looked him over like a problem instead of a child. He remembered the social worker telling him he needed to stop running away. She said things would get better if he followed instructions. Liam nodded at her because she expected it, but inside he knew better. Instructions never protected him. Instructions didn't help when he was cornered in hallways or blamed for things he didn't do. Instructions didn't take away the loneliness of lying awake, knowing no one was coming back for him. The puppy shifted and made a soft groan. Liam snapped back into the moment. He lifted the dog closer and rubbed its side. The puppy's breathing steadied again. He wondered how long it had been alone before he found it. He wondered who let it slip through their fingers. A metallic clang sounded outside. Liam stiffened. Footsteps passed near the container, slow and dragging. Maybe a worker, maybe someone else looking for shelter. He held the puppy tight, keeping it silent against his chest. The steps grew louder, paused near the container door, then continued. The person kicked something metal on the ground, muttered, and walked away. Liam didn't move until the lot fell silent again. Hours slipped by. The puppy slept on and off. Liam didn't risk sleeping himself. Kids who slept in unsecured places often woke with empty pockets or missing shoes. He stretched his legs to keep them from going numb. Late afternoon light crept through the container cracks, turning gold, then fading into grey. The temperature dropped again. Liam felt it first in his fingers. The puppy felt it too. The animal woke shivering, despite the coat, the scarf, and the warmth of his body. He realized he couldn't stay there through the night. The metal walls would freeze. The air would sink into both of them. The dog might not survive it. He stood holding the puppy to his chest with one arm while adjusting the coat with the other. He slipped outside the container. The sky looked heavy, as if threatening snow. The kind of cold that seeped into places no one prepared for. He walked quickly toward the exit of the lot. The wind pushed against him, carrying the distant smell of fuel and winter. As he stepped through the gap in the fence, he heard another motorcycle engine, this time closer, slower, not racing, searching. The sound rolled down the street, steady and controlled. Liam looked but couldn't see the bike through the parked trucks. The noise lingered long enough that even the puppy lifted its head, ears twitching. Then the engine faded again. For a moment, Liam felt something strange, a quiet awareness, a sense that someone out there moved with purpose. Not toward him specifically, he wasn't important enough for that, but toward something that mattered. He kept walking. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. He headed toward the laundromat because he knew the back door sometimes didn't latch. If he was lucky, the dryers in the corner would still be warm from earlier customers, warm enough to keep the puppy alive until morning. When he reached the alley behind the building, he tested the back door. It was locked, not stuck, locked. He pushed once more, hoping, but no luck. He swallowed the disappointment and turned away. As he stepped around the dumpster, a voice snapped out from the side yard, not words, just a harsh sound of someone clearing their throat loudly. A man stood smoking near the service entrance. He watched Liam with narrow eyes. Liam lowered his gaze and kept walking. The man muttered something under his breath. Liam heard footsteps behind him, but didn't turn back. Eventually the footsteps stopped. His chest tightened. He felt the familiar cycle beginning, the constant alertness, the fear of being noticed for the wrong reasons, the instinct to shrink into himself. The puppy shifted inside the coat, letting out a soft cry. Liam rubbed its head, keeping his steps steady. He turned toward the bus depot next. The waiting area sometimes stayed open late. It wasn't warm, but it had walls and lights. Maybe he could sit in a corner until the worst of the cold passed. Maybe the puppy would make it through the night if he kept holding it tightly enough. He moved through the streets quietly, head down, body curled around the small weight inside his coat. The city wasn't dangerous in an obvious way. It was dangerous in the slow, grinding way that came from indifference. People walked past without seeing him. Cars splashed dirty water on the sidewalk. A woman argued on her phone while stepping around him, as if he were trash in the road. He tightened his arms around the puppy. The dog rested its chin against his chest. The simple pressure grounded him. Fear didn't hit him all at once. It came in waves, small and constant. The knowledge that he was one mistake away from losing the only living thing that depended on him, one wrong corner, one adult who questioned him, one cold night. As he neared the depot, another motorcycle sound drifted through the air. Softer this time, closer. The engine idled for a few seconds before moving again. Liam looked over his shoulder, but saw only a dark street lit by a broken lamp. He didn't know that the rider was circling these blocks for a reason. He didn't know that someone somewhere had lost a puppy that mattered more than anyone understood. He didn't know that the day was moving toward a slow, unavoidable breaking point. The bus depot lights flickered overhead, buzzing like worn-out insects. Liam kept his head down and entered the waiting area. His shoulders stayed tight, ready for someone to shout at him. No one did. A handful of passengers sat scattered on the plastic chairs, staring at phones or the floor. A security guard stood near the far wall, leaning against a pillar with a bored expression. The man barely glanced at Liam. That was good. Being ignored was safer than being seen. Liam chose a corner seat behind a vending machine, where the drafts were weaker. He opened his coat a little so the puppy could breathe easier. The dog wasn't shaking as violently now, but its eyes drooped with exhaustion. Liam rested its head on his forearm and held it there, counting the slow breaths. Outside, a steady wind pushed trash along the sidewalk. Every few minutes, the depot doors slid open with a hiss, letting in cold air and new footsteps. Liam tensed each time. A bus driver announced departure times without looking at the small boy tucked behind the machine. For a moment, it almost looked like they could stay through the night. But safety never lasted long for kids who lived outside the edges. A woman approached the vending machines. She wore a thick coat and carried a purse that brushed Liam's knee as she reached for the keypad. The puppy made a tiny noise. The woman paused, looked down, and frowned. She took a step back and squinted at the bulge in his coat. She asked if he had an animal with him. Her voice wasn't angry, just sharp with concern. That was the worst kind. Concern led to questions, and questions led to adults who made decisions for him. Liam shook his head quickly, tightening his coat. The woman didn't believe him. She called for the security guard. The guard walked over, heavy boots scraping the tile. He told Liam he couldn't sit here if he had a pet. Rules were rules. Liam stood before the guard reached him, clutching the puppy so it wouldn't fall. He nodded fast and backed away. The guard didn't chase him out, but he watched to make sure Liam left the building. The night air slapped his face as he stepped outside. Any warmth he'd built up melted immediately. The puppy whined softly, nose buried against his chest. Liam whispered breath against its fur, even though the cold muted everything. He didn't have a next plan. The depot had been the last place he knew with walls and lights. Everything else was either locked or dangerous. He stared down the long stretch of road. The sky swirled with low clouds. Snow threatened the horizon. He walked without direction, following the single rule that kept him alive. Keep moving. The city grew emptier as night pulled in. Streetlights buzzed but didn't fully chase away the dark. The smell of fuel drifted from the highway. Liam crossed a pedestrian bridge without stopping. Cars below rushed by, warm cabins traveling through a cold world he couldn't enter. Halfway across, the puppy stirred. Liam paused, leaning against the railing. The dog's breathing had a new rasp, a soft rattle he didn't like. He pressed his palm against its side. The tremors had returned. Fear climbed through his chest again, not sharp, but steady and suffocating. He needed shelter, real shelter. Somewhere he wasn't allowed, but might sneak into. He forced himself to think through the panic. There was the old auto shop 2 blocks away. Rumor said half of it was abandoned after a fire. Kids sometimes hid there when storms rolled in. The roof leaked, but it might still be warmer than the street. He headed in that direction, careful with each step. The ground felt harder beneath his shoes. His breath came out in white bursts. As he turned the corner, voices echoed from behind a dumpster. 2 men arguing. Their words were slurred, their movements unsteady. Liam angled his path wide to avoid them, but one saw him and yelled something. Liam didn't look back. He tightened his grip on the puppy and walked faster. Footsteps dragged behind him for a few seconds, then stopped. He didn't check why. The auto shop appeared at the end of the road, its sign hanging crooked. One half of the building was dark, windows boarded. The other half glowed faintly. A work light left on by whoever still operated there. He circled to the back, searching for a loose board or cracked window. A side door sat dented and rusted. He pushed it. It didn't open at first. He tried again. The latch gave just enough for him to slip in. Inside, the smell of oil and cold metal filled his nose. The room was cluttered with broken equipment, tarps and stacks of tires. The air wasn't warm, but it wasn't as biting as outside. Liam crouched behind a workbench and sat on the floor, pulling the puppy out enough to check it again. The dog's breathing sounded rough. Its eyes barely stayed open. Liam pressed the scarf around its body, trying to trap what little warmth existed. He rubbed the puppy's sides gently, small circles that kept the animal awake. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. The building creaked as the wind pushed against the walls. Liam stayed alert for footsteps or voices. The last thing he needed was to be discovered by a mechanic who'd call the police or child services. The puppy shifted weakly. Liam felt panic rise again. He couldn't lose it. Not after everything. Not when it looked at him like he mattered. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, trying not to cry. Crying made noise. Noise attracted attention. He had learned that the hard way. He didn't hear the motorcycle at first. It started as a faint hum mixed with the wind and distant traffic, but the sound grew steadier, deeper, more controlled. A tone that cut through the night with purpose. The puppy lifted its head, ears twitching, reacting more than it had in hours. Liam froze. The engine drew closer, then closer still. It slowed outside the auto shop. The bike idled for several seconds, as if the rider was scanning the shadows. Then it moved again, circling the block. Liam's heart hammered. He didn't know why the bike unsettled him. Maybe because it felt intentional. Maybe because the puppy reacted to it in a way it hadn't reacted to anything else. Not fear, but recognition buried under exhaustion. The engine returned, creeping along the street like someone searching for something small and precious. Liam held the puppy tighter. He didn't know that a little girl had spent the entire day crying in a garage on the other side of the city. He didn't know she had described a puppy with a torn ear and soft paws. He didn't know that her father, a quiet, serious man wearing a worn leather cut with a steel Guardian's patch, had promised her he would not stop looking. The bike passed the shop one more time, slower than before, close enough that Liam saw the faint glow of the headlight trace across the boarded window. The puppy let out a soft, broken whimper. The night paused around them, as if holding its breath. The slow breaking point had begun. The sound of the motorcycle faded again, leaving only the creaks of the old auto shop and the wind outside. Liam tried to steady his breathing. The puppy lay in his arms with its head drooping against his wrist. Its eyes blinked slowly, fighting sleep in a way that did not feel peaceful. He rubbed the dog's chest with small movements, trying to keep it present. His fingers were numb. His legs ached from staying in the same position. He forced himself to stand and walk in small circles behind the workbench. The movement helped his own body stay warm, and the shifting seemed to remind the puppy that it was still held. A door slammed somewhere deeper in the building. The sound shot through the quiet space. Liam flinched. He held the puppy tighter and flattened himself against a stack of tires. Footsteps followed, heavy and impatient, crossing concrete with the rhythm of someone who belonged here. A man's voice echoed down the corridor. He cursed at a stuck lock, at the cold, at the long day. A light clicked on in the front bay. A strip of brightness slipped under the doorframe and across the floor. Liam held his breath. This was supposed to be the abandoned side. Maybe the man was just grabbing something and leaving again. He waited, hoping the footsteps would fade. Instead, they came closer. Keys rattled. A side door opened. Light spilled into the cluttered area where Liam hid. The man stepped in, older, broad-shouldered, wearing grease-stained coveralls. His eyes swept the room once and landed on the small figure behind the bench. He frowned immediately. He demanded to know what Liam was doing there. His voice was not curious. It was sharp, carrying the tone of someone who had chased people off this property before. Liam tried to pull back, but there was nowhere to go. The man took 2 steps forward and saw the puppy in Liam's arms. He scoffed and asked if Liam was stealing from him, if that dog had been taken from one of the cars, if he was using the shop to hide strays. His words came fast, fueled by exhaustion and frustration. He did not wait for an answer. He reached for the puppy. The movement was rough, more about getting rid of a problem than handling a living creature. Liam twisted his body away. The man grabbed the collar of Liam's coat instead and yanked. The puppy cried out at the sudden pressure. Liam stumbled, nearly dropping the dog. He begged the man to stop, the words tumbling out in a clumsy rush. He said the puppy was freezing, that they just needed a little warmth, that they would leave when it was safer. The man did not care. He said he was not running a shelter. He said people dumped animals behind the shop all the time and he was tired of dealing with it. He said this was private property and he would call the police. He reached again, this time managing to grip the puppy's hind leg. The dog yelped a high, panicked sound. Instinct overrode weakness for a moment. The puppy twisted in Liam's arms and snapped with small teeth, catching the edge of the man's hand. It was not a deep bite, more of a desperate warning, but it was enough. The man jerked back and swore loudly. He glared at the animal, then at Liam. His face changed in a way that made Liam's stomach drop. The patience he had left was gone. He stepped forward and shoved Liam hard in the shoulder. Liam hit a metal cabinet and slid down, still clutching the puppy. Pain shot through his side. The dog whimpered, squirming in confusion and fear. The man stepped toward them again, hand raised as if to smack the dog away or pry it out of Liam's arms by force. The puppy did the only thing it could. It wriggled free just enough to slip through a gap in the coat and tumble to the floor. Its legs barely held, but fear drove it forward. It ran toward the nearest strip of light, its paws sliding on the cold concrete. It crashed into a stack of boxes and kept going, barking hoarsely, a broken little sound. The man shouted and went after it. The dog reached the open side door and stumbled out into the yard. The night grabbed at it with cold and wind. The puppy kept barking, short and frantic, as if calling for help from something it remembered but could not quite picture. Out on the street, the motorcycle engine returned. This time it was close and clear. The sound cut through the wind and the distant traffic. The rider slowed almost to a crawl near the front of the shop, scanning the dark spaces between buildings. The puppy's bark reached the road, thin but high. The bike stopped. The engine dropped into a low idle. Liam heard it all from inside, his heart pounding. He pushed himself up, ignoring the ache in his side, and ran after the puppy. The man shouted at him to get back, but Liam did not listen. He could not leave the dog alone out there. He reached the yard just as the puppy stumbled toward the street, its legs shaking. The headlight from the bike washed over the small body, over the torn ear, over the makeshift scarf still hanging from its neck. The rider sat still on the bike, helmet on, heavy leather cut over a thick hoodie. On the back of the cut, the patch glowed in the headlight, a steel-colored emblem with the words "Steel Guardians" curved along the top. The rider stared at the puppy, not moving, as if checking every detail against a memory. The yard light above the door buzzed. The man from the shop burst out into the open, holding his stinging hand, shouting that the dog was vicious and needed to be taken away, that the kid was trespassing and causing trouble. His voice rose with anger and embarrassment. The puppy flinched at the noise and tried to retreat, but its legs wobbled. It collapsed onto the cold ground. The rider swung one leg off the bike and stepped onto the pavement. He removed his helmet, revealing a face weathered by years on the road. Short beard, lines around the eyes, a stare that held both fatigue and focus. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked what was happening here. Another engine approached from the side street, then a third. 2 more bikes rolled up and stopped in a loose triangle pattern, their headlamps casting overlapping circles of light. Both riders wore the same patch, Steel Guardians. From the first bike, a small figure slid down from the passenger seat, a girl of about 8, bundled in a too large jacket, boots slightly worn at the toes. Her eyes were red and puffy. She clutched an empty collar in one hand, the metal tag glinting in the light. She saw the shape on the ground before anyone could block her view. Her entire body stiffened. The empty collar slipped from her fingers and clattered against the asphalt. She ran past her father before he could stop her, dropping to her knees beside the puppy. She called the dog by a short, simple name. The sound tore out of her like air she had been holding since morning. The puppy's head twitched, its eyes opened halfway. It blinked at her, recognition slowly pushing through layers of shock and cold. The girl reached out with shaking hands, touching the torn ear and the familiar paw pads. Tears ran down her face. She kept repeating the name softer now, pressing her forehead against the dog's neck. The man from the shop stood there stunned. He muttered that the dog had been under his property, that he did not know it belonged to anyone, that the kid had snuck in and refused to leave. His voice lost some of its aggression now that the scene had changed. The first biker, the girl's father, walked closer. His jaw was tight. He looked at the puppy, at the scarf, at the way the animal's fur was pressed flat in the pattern of someone's arms. He looked at Liam, standing nearby with his coat half open, chest rising fast, eyes wide and frightened. The biker asked the girl in a low voice if this was really her dog. She nodded so hard her whole body shook. She tried to explain between sobs how he had gotten out of the yard 2 nights ago when a gate latch failed, how she had not slept since, how she had handed out crumpled drawings at gas stations and corner stores. Her father had ridden every block he could, circling and circling, following any rumor of a small dog with a torn ear. He turned to Liam and asked where he had found the puppy. Liam's words came out uneven. He told him about the bridge, about the drainage pipe and the wet fur, about the cold that did not let the dog stop shaking. He said he had tried to keep the puppy warm with his coat, with the scarf from the donation bin, with hand dryers and patches of sun and any shelter he could find. He admitted sneaking into the shop because he was afraid the dog would not make it through the night. The man from the shop tried to interrupt, insisting that the boy should not have been there, that he had no right to bring animals into the building. The biker lifted a hand, palm out, and the other man fell quiet. There was no threat in the gesture, only a firm line that did not invite argument. One of the other bikers knelt beside the puppy and checked its paws, its belly, its gums. He said quietly that the dog was cold and weak, but still responsive. He said they needed to move fast if they wanted it to fully recover. The girl looked up, eyes swollen, and asked if her dog would die. The words came out broken. The kneeling biker told her that the puppy had held on this long and that they were not leaving it on the ground. He said they were taking it to the emergency vet now. The girl nodded and then looked at Liam. For the first time she really saw him. Thin, clothes worn down, hands red from cold. She understood that someone had kept her dog alive through a night and a day that would have ended differently. She reached for his sleeve and held it. She told her father that the boy had saved her puppy. She said this in a simple way, but there was no hesitation in her voice. The father's eyes stayed on Liam. He had the look of a man who had grown up around systems that let kids fall through cracks. He recognized the signs without needing a file or a report. The backpack that sagged with too few possessions, the wary posture of someone expecting to be shoved away, the quick way Liam avoided direct eye contact, ready for blame. The shop owner started talking again, saying he was going to call the police anyway, that trespassing was still trespassing. He jabbed a finger toward Liam, saying the boy had refused to leave and that the dog had bitten him. One of the other steel guardians stepped closer to the man. He asked to see the bite. The man extended his hand, grumbling. The mark was shallow, barely more than a scrape. The biker raised an eyebrow and asked if this was really what the man wanted to make a case about, with a freezing puppy on the ground and a child who had done more good than harm. The shop owner shifted his weight. His anger began to look less certain. He glanced at the 3 bikes, at the patches, at the calm but unwavering way they stood. The Steel Guardians were known in this part of the city. They were not outlaws, but they were not easily pushed around either. They rode charity runs, showed up at community events, helped out at disaster sites. They also had reputations for not backing down when something felt wrong. The father spoke again, voice calm but solid. He said that if the man wanted to file a report, he was welcome to call it in. He added that he would make sure to explain that a stray kid with no coat to spare had been trying to keep a missing child's dog alive in the cold, while an adult with a heated building and 4 walls had chosen to throw both out into the night. The words hung between them. The shop owner looked away first. He muttered that he did not want trouble, that he just wanted his place left alone. He said he would forget the whole thing if they all left now. He turned his back and went inside, letting the door slam shut. The yard fell quiet except for the low idle of one of the bikes and the girl's soft crying. The father knelt beside his daughter and the puppy. He removed his cut and laid it on the ground as a barrier between the cold and the dog's body. Then he slid his arms under the puppy carefully, lifting it with both hands. The scarf stayed wrapped around the animal. He told his daughter to stay close. He looked at Liam and asked a simple question. Did the boy have anywhere to go tonight? Liam hesitated. He thought about lying, about nodding and walking off into the dark, but his legs shook and the cold had settled into his bones. The girl was still holding his sleeve, as if letting go meant erasing what he had done. He shook his head once. The father nodded slowly, as if this confirmed what he already knew. He said they were taking the puppy to the vet and then back to their garage. He said the girl would not sleep unless she knew the dog was safe. He added that if Liam wanted to come with them, they would make sure he got food and a place to sit that was not concrete. No promises beyond that, no grand speeches. Just a direct offer. Liam looked from the man to the girl to the puppy. The dog's eyes met his again, still weak but present. In that look there was trust formed under a bridge, on sidewalks, in cold metal rooms. The girl watched both of them, confused but grateful. He stepped forward. One of the bikers moved his own jacket aside and guided Liam toward the second bike, speaking quietly so the boy did not startle. He showed him where to put his feet, how to hold on. He wrapped an extra hoodie around Liam's chest to block the wind. None of it felt rehearsed. It felt like people who had done this for others before. The father settled the puppy in front of his daughter on the first bike, wrapped in the club cut and the scarf. Her small arms curved around the sleeping body. She leaned forward, resting against her father's back, one hand still on the dog. Engines started up again, one after another, controlled and even. The steel guardians pulled out of the yard with slow, deliberate movement, not a dramatic roar. Just 3 bikes carrying a little girl, her lost puppy, and a thin boy who had nowhere else to go. The night around them stayed cold and indifferent, but for the first time in a long while, Liam was not moving through it alone. The ride across the city was slow. Not because the bikers lacked skill, but because the father kept checking the mirrors, adjusting his speed whenever the little girl shifted her grip on the puppy. The other 2 riders kept formation around them, creating a small pocket of safety in the dark streets. Their engines weren't loud. They rumbled in a steady, controlled rhythm that felt almost like breathing. Liam held onto the biker in front of him with cautious hands. He had never ridden on a motorcycle before. The wind bit at the gaps in the borrowed hoodie, but the rider adjusted his position to shield him from the worst of it. Liam didn't know if that was intentional or instinct, but the small gesture settled something deep in his chest. Streetlights passed overhead in slow intervals. The city looked different from this height, wider, quieter, less threatening. The puppy's head rested against the girl's arm. Every now and then its ear twitched. The girl whispered small sounds to it, not words, just the noises children use when they're trying to keep something alive with presence alone. They turned into a side road where an auto garage sat behind a chain-link fence. The sign above the bay door was old but cared for, the paint touched up, the lights working. The building wasn't fancy, but it felt lived in, like a place where people spent long hours without rushing. As they pulled in, a man stepped out from the office. He wore the same steel guardian's patch. He looked older than the others, grey hair tied back, eyes sharp and alert. He held the door open as the father carried the puppy inside. The room smelled like warm oil, rubber and diesel, but also like heat, real heat. Radiators clicked softly. A kettle steamed on a back counter. A folded blanket lay on a chair, as if someone had prepared for this moment without knowing it would come. The girl followed her father, staying so close her coat brushed his leg. Liam hesitated at the entrance until one of the bikers gave him a small nod to step in. He did, feeling the warmth hit him all at once. His fingers tingled painfully from the temperature change. The father laid the puppy on the blanket, still wrapped in the club cut and scarf. The older biker knelt to check the dog again, pressing fingers gently along its ribs, feeling its paws, examining its breathing. He nodded once. The pup was cold, but not fading. The worst had passed. The girl finally let herself breathe. She crouched beside the blanket, resting her head near the puppy's neck. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her relief filled the air like something physical. Liam hovered near the doorway, unsure where he was supposed to stand. The father glanced at him and pointed to a stool near the heater. Liam moved there quietly, his legs unsteady. He sat and held his hands out to the warmth, watching his skin slowly regain color. One of the bikers handed him a bottle of water. Another passed him half a sandwich wrapped in paper. There were no speeches, no questions, no instructions. They just gave him the things they assumed he needed. Liam ate slowly, not because he wasn't hungry, but because the sudden access to food felt unreal. He kept glancing at the door, expecting someone official to walk in and ask why a kid like him was here. No one came. The father crouched beside the puppy again. He brushed the girl's hair with one hand, steady and gentle, then looked over at Liam. He asked again where Liam had been staying. Liam didn't answer at first. He looked down at his hands. He wasn't used to anyone asking because they actually wanted to help. He gave a small, honest shrug. The father nodded slowly and didn't push further. The older biker stood and went to a metal cabinet. He returned with a small portable heater, the kind used on job sites. He set it near the blanket and adjusted the angle so the warm air washed over the puppy without overwhelming it. The pup's breathing softened. The girl tucked the scarf closer around her dog. She looked at Liam again, not with curiosity, but with the simple recognition that he had done something for her when no one else had. She didn't smile, but her eyes were softer now. The father stepped closer to Liam. He didn't tower over him. He stood at a respectful distance. He told Liam that the vet had been notified and was preparing a space for them. He said they would drive there in a few minutes. He added that if Liam wanted to come, they weren't leaving him behind. Liam looked up, surprised. He asked if he was allowed. The father said the boy had carried that puppy through cold that grown men couldn't tolerate. That kind of effort earned a spot in the truck, at least for tonight. One of the bikers brought over a long jacket, too big for Liam, but warm. He draped it over the boy without saying anything else. Another biker put gloves into Liam's lap. They weren't new, but they were lined and thick. The garage door rattled as the wind pushed against it. The father looked toward the noise, then back at the puppy. He told the girl to get her shoes tied and her hands warmed up because the vet wasn't far, but the night was getting colder. Within minutes, they gathered what they needed. The father carried the puppy again, holding it close but steady. The girl walked beside him, not touching the dog this time, trusting it was safe in her father's arms. Liam followed carefully. The bikers kept a loose circle around all three children, the living one, the recovering one, and the one who had spent too long trying to survive alone. Outside, a truck waited with the Steel Guardian's insignia stitched into the seats. The father opened the back door. He motioned for Liam to climb in first so they could seat the puppy between the two kids. Liam slid into the seat gingerly, unsure if he belonged there. The girl climbed in next. She sat close to the puppy, her small hands hovering near its fur but not crowding it. Liam kept his hands in his lap, afraid to touch anything without permission. The girl nudged his elbow gently, a small sign that he didn't need to stay frozen. The father closed the door and got in the driver's seat. The other bikers mounted their motorcycles and prepared to escort the truck through the dark. The engine started with a steady rumble. The heater blew warm air across the children's legs. Liam exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. As they pulled out of the driveway, the girl looked at him. She didn't ask questions about where he came from or why he was alone. She just said, in a quiet voice that didn't waver, that the puppy wouldn't have survived without him. Liam didn't know how to respond. He just nodded once, eyes fixed on the bundle between them. The puppy shifted and rested its head on both of their legs at once. The father glanced at them in the mirror. Something in his expression changed, subtle but real. Recognition, understanding, a decision settling into place. The truck rolled forward into the night, escorted by the steady presence of the Steel Guardians, not as rescuers, as witnesses to what needed to come next. The emergency vet clinic stood on a quiet corner, its windows fogged from the heat inside. The truck rolled into the small lot, with the two motorcycles pulling in behind it. The father lifted the puppy carefully from the back seat, and the girl followed with both hands ready, even though she knew she couldn't carry the dog alone. Liam climbed out last, pulling the oversized jacket tight around his thin frame. Inside the clinic, the warmth hit all of them at once. A vet tech moved quickly when she saw the puppy. She didn't ask many questions, just took the animal from the father's arms and carried it to the treatment room. The girl tried to follow, but the tech knelt and told her to wait in the lobby. The father put a steady hand on her shoulder, promising quietly that they would see the dog again soon. Liam sat in one of the plastic chairs near the wall. The room smelled like antiseptic and damp coats. A small heater hummed by the counter. The bikers spread out across the room in a quiet stance that didn't need words. They weren't restless. They weren't impatient. They simply stayed. The girl sat on the chair next to Liam, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. She stared at the door the vet tech had disappeared through. Her hands trembled, not from cold but from aftershocks of fear. Liam understood that feeling, the moment when the danger had passed, but the worry still clung to the skin. After a while, the vet stepped out. She carried a small clipboard and wiped her hands on a towel. She said the puppy was stable and warming up, that its body temperature had been dangerously low but had started to climb. She said the torn ear was an old injury and would heal fine. She added that the dog would need monitoring for a few days, fluids, and rest. The girl nodded through all of it without blinking. When the vet finally said the dog would be okay, the girl let out a breath she had probably been holding since the moment the puppy ran away 2 nights earlier. She pressed her hands to her eyes for a moment, then lowered them and looked at Liam. The expression she gave him wasn't gratitude in the usual sense. It was something heavier, more grounded, recognition that someone had carried a responsibility that belonged to her family, alone, in the cold, without asking for anything. One of the bikers asked if they could see the puppy before leaving. The vet agreed and led them to a quiet room in the back. The dog rested on a warming pad, wrapped in a soft blanket. Its eyes opened slightly when the girl approached. She touched its paw gently. The puppy didn't lift its head, but it leaned into her touch with the faintest movement. The father stood behind her, watching her shoulders loosen. Then his gaze shifted to Liam, who stood near the doorway. Unsure if he was allowed to be part of this moment, the father motioned him closer. Liam stepped into the room, moving slowly, unsure of himself. The puppy recognized him too. Its tail didn't wag, but its eyes focused on him. It gave a small breath of acknowledgement. Liam felt something warm settle in his chest, the kind of feeling that came from having done something right, even if no one noticed. But here, someone noticed. The girl asked her father quietly if Liam could visit the puppy while it healed. Her voice didn't waver. The father said that would be fine, as long as it didn't interfere with the clinic's schedule. He said it in a plain way, no big gesture, just a simple acknowledgement of connection. They didn't stay long in the back room. The vet said the dog needed more rest. The group returned to the lobby. Plans needed to be discussed. Practical plans, real ones. The father asked Liam once more if he had somewhere safe to stay that night. The boy shook his head again, slower this time. He didn't feel the instinct to lie now. The girl looked at her father, waiting for his reaction. The father told Liam that they had a small office room in the garage, usually used for storing jackets and spare parts, but it had a cot. He said it wasn't fancy, but it was warm and safe. He added that the boy didn't have to sleep outside tonight. Liam didn't answer immediately, not because he doubted the offer, but because he had never been given a choice that wasn't tied to consequences. He looked at the girl, then at the jacket wrapped around him, then at the father. He nodded once. When they left the vet, the wind outside had eased. Snow had started falling, thin and scattered. The trucks and bikes moved slowly back toward the Steel Guardian's garage. The roads were quieter now, the city settling into winter night. At the garage, the bikers moved like people used to routine. One set up the cot, another brought a clean towel and a small pillow. Someone else put a mug of warm broth on the counter. They didn't make a spectacle of it. They didn't treat him like a project. They just prepared a place for him to rest because it was the right thing to do. Liam sat on the cot, the jacket still wrapped around him. He watched them move through the space with practiced calm. The girl sat across from him, legs dangling off a workbench chair. She told him in her soft way that the puppy would come home soon. She said she wanted him there when it did. The father stood near the door, arms folded, posture relaxed but attentive. He told Liam the garage would be locked for the night, and he could sleep without worry. He didn't ask for explanations about the past. He didn't push for details. He simply made sure Liam knew he wasn't leaving. Night settled deep outside. The heaters hummed. Somewhere in the distance another motorcycle passed on the road, its sound low and familiar. Liam lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. The space was quiet in a way that didn't feel threatening. He let his body relax one muscle at a time. The jacket around him was heavy, grounding, carrying a scent of leather and oil that meant safety in its own way. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't counting the hours until morning. He closed his eyes. Days turned into weeks. The puppy healed well. The clinic released it with instructions, and the girl held it steady in her arms all the way back to the garage. The dog moved with slow but steady energy, finding its place again beside her. Liam didn't disappear back into the city. He spent days sweeping the garage floor, organizing parts, running small errands with the older bikers. They never called him an orphan. They never asked him to explain why he showed up starving and carrying a freezing puppy. They simply let him exist in the space, steady and welcome. The girl brought him drawings of the puppy. The bikers brought him gloves that actually fit. The father brought him meals without asking whether he was hungry. Nothing magical happened. No perfect ending. No paperwork solved overnight. But there was consistency, warmth, a place to stand where no one shoved him aside. The puppy grew stronger. It followed Liam sometimes, slow steps across the garage floor, as if reminding him they had survived something together. Months later, the girl would say the puppy had two homes now, one with her and one with the boy who saved it under the bridge. The father didn't correct her. Liam learned not to flinch every time a door opened behind him. He learned the sound of engines that meant belonging instead of danger. He learned that sometimes if the world wasn't looking for you, a few people on motorcycles might. Not to rescue you, but to stand with you long enough that you could rescue yourself. Follow the Steel Guardians channel for more true grit stories like this.